Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ministry Matters podcast. My name is Rohan, and along with my wife, Jill, we serve as the lead pastors of a 3-small location multi-site church, C3 Camden, Picton and Thirroul in southwestern Sydney and the Illawarra. On this podcast, Jill and I discuss all matters ministry and share some of the things we've learned and are still learning along the way in our 30 plus years of pastoral ministry experience. It's our particular hope that this podcast will be of help to small church pastors and their teams and encourage you to continue to minister effectively to the wonderful people that God has entrusted into your care. The views that we express on this podcast are our own and not necessarily those of the church or denomination that we're a part of. We'd love to hear from you if you have any feedback, any comments or suggestions on any topics you'd like us to discuss in future episodes. To find out more about us or our church, check out the show notes for links to all the relevant socials and websites. So without any further ado, let's get into today's conversation.
Hello there and welcome back to Ministry Matters podcast. Great to have you with us today.
Hello, everyone. Good to be with you again today for today's episode.
Yeah, we're going to be talking today about hot topics.
Hot topics.
And how we navigate, how we direct, how we manage hot topics in our church, across our leaders, across our teams, how we do that.
Yeah, it's, unless you've been living under a rock for the last few years, you'd be vividly aware that in church life, regardless of whether you're a pastor yourself or you're trying to lead a team or a connect group or anything, any area of leadership or influence in the church, you would be aware that there are certain topics that arouse quite a lot of emotion quite quickly, and it presents with it its own challenges for how do we negotiate that as leaders. And I guess, probably in this podcast, we're kind of talking to pastors, I guess, in this episode. But if you're on a team or you're leading a small group, or you're thinking about this, you will have a context that this will be relevant to you in terms of how do you negotiate the fact that you've got different people with different perspectives on a whole range of issues in church life and in society and culture. And we've talked on previous episodes about the importance of diversity. So the question is, how do we embrace diversity? Where are the boundaries on what's diversity and what's heresy? All those kind of things. So they present with them, pretty complex issues because unless you're a narcissist, you don't want to offend people. You don't want to upset people. You want to maintain a degree of what you believe is your conviction, but do it in a way that allows space. And so I just thought we'd have a conversation around that for the next few minutes as to what are some practical little things you can do to cultivate that.
Yeah, so I guess there's always been hot topics. I mean, I can think of times in the early church where there was hot topics.
Certainly was.
There's some pretty strong perspectives.
Just read Acts 15, read the entire book of Galatians. You'll see that there were very hot topics there.
Hot topics, and a lot of the letters that were written were addressing topics, weren't they? They were addressing things that were going on, divisions and perspectives, and where things had gotten off kilter, or where where. And talking about these kind of things of unity and diversity. Mm-hmm. And so do you think we are in a time now where there is more, why does it seem a bit more prevalent now, hot topics, than it was maybe a decade or two ago?
Right. I think a big part of that is as society shifts. So society is moving politically is moving, as a general, is moving more to the left, which will mean in many areas, not in all areas, because this is the thing, is that like Christians hold themselves up and, say we're conservative. We are in some areas, but I think there are some things on the left that are fundamental value, which would be regarded as
Oh, you're jumping
politically
straight
left.
into politics.
Yeah, which would be regarded as politically left, which are also Christian values, care for the immigrant and the poor and so on, which probably would be more on the left leaning than the right leaning. So I don't think, the thing is, this is probably the problem, is that the church has become politicized and polarized. Whereas I would think that we should be, as leaders, trying to avoid politicizing the church. And there'll be people who think you're too left and then you're too right and all that sort of stuff. But if you can go, no, I want to stay true to what I feel the convictions of what Jesus is saying. So because the Christian church, and I'm talking about in Western countries especially, we are moving from the middle, and not the middle politically, but we are moving from the mainstream to the fringes of society.
The
church is, and the church's values and things for a long.
So when you say that, you mean that the majority of people in society, don't necessarily affiliate with a church anymore. Less people.
Yeah, I think that's well, we see that statistically in our survey results.
So we were mainstream. We said this in the census results, don't we?
Yes.
So we were more Christianized nation. We were Christianity. Church attending was mainstream.
Yes, even if church, go back to my parents' generation, church attending was mainstream. Probably our generation, church attending wasn't mainstream, but I think largely church values,
Right.
Christian values, were still probably holding a fair amount of sway within society. Now, what's happening is some of those values have gone. Steve McAlpin's got a great book about being the bad guys, which is about this. Is I think we've gone from being the good guys to being the bad guys. And so what was regarded as once mainstream values of society and now are regarded as bigoted or outmoded or outdated. And so what that's done is it's moved the Christian worldview to the fringes. So in that sense, I think hot topics are up for the cards. And how as Christians we handle that? Because there are numbers of ways as Christian churches and as leaders we can handle that. And I see the full range. I see people just going hammer and tong against it and waging war and saying we're going to fight against this. I personally don't think that's healthy. But I also see the other end of the spectrum is, well, let's just roll down and not have any absolutes and not have any values that we hold dear, and just give in to everything in the sake of being a nice person. And I don't think that's healthy either. But I do think that, and this isn't supposed to be a political episode. This is just about you as a leader, as a pastor, as a connect group leader, finding a way to negotiate. Well, firstly, what's important to you, and then what's important to your people, and then finding out how you can have that conversation.
And I guess it's good to not assume that we all are going to be in agreement on things.
Good call.
So probably, years back as a young Christian in the late 80s, early 90s, for me, we were fairly leadership-directed, leadership-driven. Whatever the perspective of the leader was, we sort of thought, well, that needs to be the perspective we adopt. And then, we sort of have seen it. We've seen a hyper-honor sort of stuff as well, where people think, I can't really have an opinion of my own. I have to have the opinion of the leader, and that's the honor. If they sort of have seen that as being part of honoring the leader.
Yep.
And I think, do you think that we have a different perspective now in that we are more, we don't necessarily see that a leader is about telling everybody their view and having everybody follow that, but more about maybe, which probably was more the case in the early church, more about somehow not about agreeing on the viewpoint, but about being able to love one another and respect one another and be able to have diverse perspectives and still be a company of people who love Jesus and who are following the king, following the ways of the kingdom and following, having the, main focus of the gospel as still as the main, but not
allowing for
necessarily
a greater level of diversity in
not
other
necessarily
areas.
agreeing on all the other bits.
Yeah, and I think that's the point of what I'm trying to get at with this podcast, is that as a leader, I think it's important that if you're not prepared for this, you'll be led down all kinds of paths. You'll have people who think you're you're giving in too much. You'll have others who think you're being too hard and too rigid. So you need to think through the process. And the missing link, I think, the number one missing link is we have lost the art of healthy communication and disagreement. I think cancel culture has not helped that. And cancel culture is not just a political thing that's on one side or another. I think human nature is I will cancel anybody, I will shut anybody out of my world who disagrees with me.
Well, that would have been a little bit like what we had in previous decades. We were almost a little bit cancel culture without realising it. We thought
the church was
because we were like in a bit of a bubble, weren't
correct.
We?
I think that's
but we
the
only
problem.
We only wanted to hear from people who were like-minded.
Totally.
And we all sort of rallied together and thought, oh, isn't this wonderful? But we were really cancelling out anyone who was different.
We were just watching an episode of The Newsreader, which is a great television show that's on, and we were just saying this is 1987, and we were just realising some of the things they're talking about in 1987, and we were saying, my goodness, I don't think any of those things would get across the line today because society has shifted so much, and for good in many ways, but society has changed. And so while certain values were regarded as mainstream, we were cancelling others without realising it. And this is human nature. Those in the majority will always tend to cancel those in the minority, either intentionally or unintentionally.
So we're probably putting a barrier in place for those people actually being able to come to a church.
Correct, exactly.
We wouldn't have necessarily been able to know what to do with them.
No. So that's why I would lean towards, okay, let's go this different perspective now and go, what can we do to create environments where we don't cancel one another, where we embrace conversation? Friends, most of your young people, most of your people in your church, unless you're living in a, really deep Bible belt, probably have a deep level exposure to worldviews that are totally counteractive to much of what you would hold as a Christian in your church. Now, the question is, what do we do with that? How do we handle that?
That's just in our family.
That's just in our family. That's right. So what do we do and how do we handle that? And I think it is first and foremost, it's coming to a recognition that people who disagree with you have a different perspective view. More often than not, they're not evil people. There are far people on each end of any particular perspective, whether it's political or social or whatever. The loudest voices on the top 10% and the bottom 10% are going to make all the noise. But there's a vast majority of people who just are trying to work it out, and they've got genuine questions. And so I would say creating a culture in your church, or making a decision to make a culture in your church where communication and healthy disagreement and safety around asking questions that might be even heretical, but just giving people the dignity of going, let's just wrestle through the opposite side of that. I often say to people, I encourage people, imagine you were back in high school, in your high school debate team, and you have to argue for a case that present a debate side that you don't agree with. I think if we can help people to do that, to debate a different side.
Like the mock trial.
Like a mock trial thing, it forces you to see a different perspective. If nothing else, it might strengthen your perspective, but it'll give you a grace and a compassion and actually get you outside your echo chamber. So, I think that kind of healthy conversation, saying to your church in the right appropriate context, saying to your church congregation or to your Connect group, maybe tonight's Connect group discussion isn't going to be, we're not going to talk about a particular social issue or whatever, but letting people know that there is safety to talk about it in the right context at the right time and ask questions and not be demonized because they have a different perspective.
It's a good point for a facilitator of groups, particularly when you have that forum kind of situation where people are sharing and people are opening up. That it's probably something to think about, isn't it? Of facilitating that kind of discussion is going to mean that there are maybe even that there's an agreement of respect and to listen and to not cut one another off.
Certain rules of engagement,
all that kind of thing, because
that's not unique. Paul was facing that constantly in the New Testament, where he's got Jews and Gentiles together in the same church.
Right, yeah,
they've got very radically different worldviews and political views and all kinds of things, and he's saying, I need you guys to get on with one another. I need you to find a way to cut each other some slack. Even if you disagree, cut each other some slack. And I think that's the healthy thing that is probably missing. And I actually think we as the Christian church should champion that, because I don't think when it comes to politics, I don't think either side of that does that well. So let's be the people who are different and allow healthy conversation and actually be inquisitive, like you keep saying, be curious, not conclusive. If you have a different perspective to you, rather than just being concluded that person's an idiot or that person's evil or that person's a crazy person, just going, let me be curious. What tell me about what gives you that perspective. We'll become bigger people. We'll become more embracive people, embracive of others' perspectives. So here's just some thoughts I had written down on this. As a leader, the first thing to be asking yourself is, what voices are your people listening to? We need to know our people before we can disciple them effectively. And people are listening to certain podcasts. They're listening to certain news channels. They're reading certain papers and media sources and so on. All of that, being aware of that, because that is building a narrative that your people that you
Who they're
lead,
following on Twitter.
all of that is building a narrative. And if you don't know that, so some people might be listening to voices that are going to be more progressive. Some are listening to voices that are going to be more conservative. And it can often feed in this antagonism. So just being aware, asking questions, finding out what people are listening to, what people are watching, what people's worldviews are, what their family of origin is, all of those sorts of things. That's step one. Rather than just jumping to conclusion, be curious, find that out. And then following on from that is you as a leader, what are you listening to? What voices, what podcasts are you listening to? What perspective have you got? What what social media channels are you following? Because that will also do it. And I would say, as a leader, we don't have the luxury of only listening to one perspective.
I remember this last year. I wanted to subscribe to a news channel online, and I didn't really know the difference between them. I just kind of went, whatever, I'll subscribe to anyone. And then I realised along the way, okay, there's, it's actually known, the different print media organisations, you can Google them and find out what their angle is.
Oh, yes.
And I realised pretty quickly, all these articles are all geared towards the same perspective.
Yep.
And then I went, okay, that's what this paper's
There's a great website called Media Bias Fact Check.
Yeah.
Just
so
Google
I was
that.
just going to say to you, and so then I stopped subscribing to that one after a while, so I got sick of just always hearing the same thing. But I was going to ask you, and I do subscribe to my local rag, the Illawarra Mercury, because it's I want to know local
what's happening in your local community.
But but as for the big, the big media, what's going on and the big issues. What's that one that you listened to, that you've subscribed to?
I recommend The Conversation.
The Conversation.
It's free. You can. It's not driven by a media company, so they use experts. And
big media is about power.
It's about power and
politics and money and it's
succession.
all about influence.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can't rely on it.
No,
you can't rely on the truth.
No, that's right. So if you can find something, or at least, so I recommend The Conversation because it is. And it's recognised as being middle of the road. So it uses it doesn't use loaded language. They state facts, not opinion as much, and so on. Or if they're making an opinion, they'll tell you. So it's a useful tool. The other way around it is to actually force yourself to listen to different perspectives.
I was going to say that could be the other thing is have a couple of different ones.
If you're listening to a Murdoch news thing, find one on the opposite side and listen to that.
Yep.
So you actually force yourself outside your echo chamber. The echo chamber, what a lot of people don't understand is when it comes to social media, it's all about money too. So the algorithms within Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and so on, they will keep feeding you more of the same thing because they want to keep you on their page. And so the money is because they make money out of advertising.
Fashion.
It's fashion for you, yes, right.
Fashion ads and holiday ads at the moment.
Holiday ads, there you go. And we all know, don't we, that, we say, how is it that they know? It's because the algorithm is working to keep you to generate money. It's all money-based. So you need to do what you can to force yourself outside your own echo chamber. If you don't, all of us will find ourselves buying into whatever narrative we're hearing. It's impossible for us not to because it sounds reasonable. So we have to force ourselves and we have to have conversations. So if we have a certain perspective about something, I'd say this too, whether it's a perspective about a different ethnic group or a different socioeconomic group. If you come from a higher socioeconomic group and you have a tendency to look down on people from lower socioeconomic groups, I would say something as simple as, have you had a conversation? Have you sought out somebody who has come from the other side of the tracks? The same goes for if you've come from a lower socioeconomic group, rather than just assuming that all rich people are all bigots. Have you, wherever you sit, could you source out someone and have a conversation with them? Say, can I shout you a coffee? Or if you're on this, lower end, ask them to shout you a coffee. But, could I have a conversation with you? I'd love to learn.
Genuinely listen.
Hear your story and listen. And I think that's a good next step. So who are your people listening to? Who are you listening to? Have you had conversations? Have you forced yourself outside your echo chamber? If you don't, then you will be stuck in that. And what will end up happening is you'll end up limiting your world. And we had this during COVID. I mean, if you're a church pastor, you know almost certainly that you had people who joined your church because you were pro-vax or anti-vax, or you had other people who left your church because you were pro-vax or anti-vax or whatever. Or, you know, we had people who thought we were trying to hold a middle of the ground road where we wanted to not have perspective too much. We still didn't please everybody. And so regardless of where you fit on these issues, you will alienate some and you will win some.
Yep.
So you don't want to be a leader who just tries to win people who you think you might have grown the church because you've won people for a certain perspective. But if they're united, if you've won them because they're united against something, then when that thing they're united against is no longer an issue, they're not united for anything. So
that's interesting, because it makes me think it's a little bit like walking the narrow road, isn't it? And going, well, you know, it can be easy. It could be easier to talk about things all the time that are going to be people pleasing. To talk about popular topics, to talk about things that people are going to like, to what's the word? What's the scripture say? To
tickle their ears.
Tickle their ears.
Is that what you were saying? Yep.
I was going to say prickle, but it was
prickle the ears.
To tickle the ears.
Tickle the ears.
And to a degree, you can bring in you could bring in really dynamic preachers who preach great stuff, who make people feel good, and you might draw the crowds. And I don't want to sound judgy, but we just have gone, look, we have to stick to our convictions of what we think is the truth and what we stand on and what we believe is good, is the good way for us.
Totally.
In the slow and steady, discipling people, integrity, helping people to think through these things, etc. So anyway, back to what you were saying.
No, well, that's spot on. This actually leads to my next point on my notes here, which was you need to form up a list of what mountains you're going to die on. Because if you fall for nothing, you'll fall. What is it? You don't stand for anything, you'll fall for it. You stand for something, you'll fall for anything. I've got to write in a minute.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything.
Okay.
So I think as a leader, and this isn't about you deciding, you don't have to have the same mountains as I have. Some people will have more mountains to die on than others.
It's what you're called to as well.
It's what you're called to. It's your conviction. It's in good faith as a leader. What are the things that you go, these are absolutes and these things are maybe open-handed issues? What's a closed-handed issue and what's an open-handed issue? And I know my tendency will be to have more open-handed issues than many people. So some people will think, you're being a bit too woke because you're open-handed on certain issues. I know that's my tendency. So because of that, I probably need to pull back to more the conservative end. Whereas others will go, no, I'm holding everything loose, everything tight. And maybe if you know that's your tendency, be willing to open up, but go, theologically, as a leader, you have a responsibility to guard the truth, speak the truth in love, Paul says. So you need to know, okay, well, what is the truth? What is the things that I hold dear, that my team hold dear? What are we going to maintain as absolutes? And be aware of those things, but then not just say, okay, they're my absolutes, I'm just going to demonize anybody who disagrees, but take those absolutes and go, now let's assume that there are Christians, people who have a different view on me on this. They don't think it's an absolute, or they have a different perspective to me, but they're not evil people. Let's assume there are people out there who genuinely, I would disagree with 100%, but I know that they believe they're doing the right thing. So then argue that side, so that at least rather than just dismissing it, you've forced yourself to argue the other side. It's amazing how many times you might go, hey, I don't agree with you on that, but I respect you as a person that you have made it what you believe is the decision, and I honor you in that decision. I may not agree with it, but that in itself is unity. Unity does not require uniformity. Unity can still allow diversity. So you might think, well, these are the important things for my church and our church, but they might not be important for others. So you might be able to go, okay, well, there are other people out there who, in all good conviction, we don't agree with them, but they believe this. So you can still find points of unity.
Yeah, you might have when you talk about that thing of what mountain are you going to die on, I'm thinking that, you might have a really strong conviction about something. You might have a gift of faith in a certain area. And, I'm just thinking about Jericho, about marching around the walls of Jericho, and the conviction that we are going to continue. We are going to doggedly keep marching around this thing and keep doing what we're doing until we see the breakthrough. Yep. Because this is the mountain we're going to die. We are here. We're not going anywhere. Nothing's going to move me from this.
We're staying the course.
You see that in the rebuilding of the wall, of the walls of Jerusalem.
Yep.
That the commitment to, well, he's my place on the wall.
Yep. I'm not getting off the wall, Nehemiah said.
I'm not getting off the wall, Nehemiah said. And so I think that will be about our where our faith is, what God has for us. That will be thinking about Michael Hyatt's book on Free to Focus. That's on the thing of what wakes you up in the morning.
Yep.
What's the thing that you can't let go of? Determining that and going, this is what I want. And I think, that they're good things to get. They're good things to understand. Will I die on this hill? And there's a lot of things that will be open-handed.
They will be open-handed. Well, even I would go further. There's two questions that come to mind as you're saying that. Two questions that's worth asking yourself as we wrap up this podcast, I guess, is first of all, if you are going to die on a mountain, the next question to ask yourself is, what does dying on that mountain look like? Because does dying on that mountain mean that you will fight tooth and nail to uphold it?
That's right.
That might
work
be
out what it's going to look like.
What dying looks like. That might be okay. You might go, I know I have to fight this battle. I have to wage this war.
I might be left here on my own.
That's right, like Shammah in the field. You might have to just stand there in the field of lentils and say, I'm going to stand my ground. It might be that. But dying also can actually be a passive thing, not just an active thing. So it's not always fight. There might be a time to fight, but there might be other times like Rosa Parks, who she just decided she didn't fight. She just didn't get up.
Yeah.
And she was prepared to suffer the consequences of a society that was going to throw her in jail, but was instrumental in starting the American Civil Rights Movement. But her dying looked very different to let's wage a terrorist war against the white supremacists. It was more around, no, I'm going to do passive. I'm going to be passive in my dying. I'm going to be, what did Martin Luther King call it? Civil disobedience. And I think so. You find out what you're. Because there are going to be mountains where our society is going to say that you're a bigot for dying on or whatever.
Yeah.
So what does it look like for you?
It will be unpopular at times.
There will be, and Jesus said that. So
he said that I was reading the other day about how he said to the disciples when he called the apostles, and then it goes into the bit about how he says, I'd never really seen it this way before, but how he says, basically get ready for here comes the challenges now.
Yes.
And are you ready to die?
Are you ready to die now?
Are you ready to lay everything down? Are you ready for this?
Yep.
And sometimes I think for all of us there is a laying down and a taking up of our cross.
Totally.
Laying down our life, taking up our cross. So we have to be prepared to die to things at times.
Yeah, and we need to know what that looks like. Yeah, is that active? Is that passive? It's both, and both
It's easier to be liked by people and to be popular. It's harder to walk a narrow road where people don't agree with us. People think we're small-minded. People think we're this or that.
So how can we do that? Is there a way to do that where we just embrace that and we fight against it, or is there a way to go, well, we're going to love people regardless? And and each pastor, each team, each church is going to have to make that decision. I'm not here to tell you what. And we've wrestled with this. I know I'm open to change my convictions, but I know where I sit at the moment as a lead pastor in as a theological teacher on this stuff and what mountains I'll die on and how I'll die on them. I know that. And I'm open to change. And I'm not here to tell you what your mountains are or how you should die on them, but I would say it's worth having that conversation and thinking that through. What does it look like for you? Because here's a few things. I mean, you can when you're handling persecution, when it's coming against you, you've got a few different things. You can bunker down and just say, let's just withdraw and not engage at all, and let's just hold on till Jesus comes back and the world's a dark place. You can do that. You can yield to, as I said, you can yield to the values of the world. I don't think that's healthy either. You can fight back. You can antagonistically fight back. You can declare. You can get on your soapbox. There might be times to do that. There maybe not times to do that. You got to work that out. What does it look like for you to represent Christ well in that moment, in that situation? So the last question I would say is, after saying what does dying look like, I would say what does love look like? And in COVID, I put together a message based around Acts 15, and it was to do with the tension around vaccination and all that kind of stuff. And I was basically saying, what does love look like for you, to ask that question? And for each of us, what does it look like to love our enemies? What does it look like to love those who disagree with us? Is there a way in which we can still love a person who we even maybe vehemently disagree with?
Can you have a prosecutor and a defence lawyer in the same Connect group, or can you have a
wonderful? Good thought.
Can you have a
Labor person and a Liberal person in the
someone
same
opposite side of politics?
Yes.
Can we have that? Because this is getting back to what you're right, what the early church was about. It's like there are polar opposites here. But
Jesus had a zealot and a tax collector.
Yeah.
You cannot get more
That's
polar
right.
opposite. And he had them in his 12 or 3
This
years.
is so good. Yeah, I love it.
So there has to be a way to do that. I mean, I don't think that was an accident that Jesus chose someone who was in in league with the Romans and someone who was basically killing the Romans in the same group. That shows me that there is a way to do this, folks.
Right.
And it has to, I would have loved to have been in some of those conversations.
Oh, absolutely.
But it shows me that there is a way to do this. If we can be thoughtful, gracious, kind, but know what our convictions are and why they're there. And I'm happy to chat. You know, I've thought through this. We've got some other resources. I'd love to chat with you about this. I just think that as time goes on, this cultural moment is going to demand this of us. We cannot bury our head in the sand and continue to think that issues of gender and sexuality and politics and COVID and the list goes on and on and on of social issues, rich, poor, immigration, disability, all of these things are coming to a head. And we cannot bury our head in the sand and think that they aren't there. So how do we address it in a non-partisan, non-political way, but help people to think critically, think biblically, and help them it's a discipleship issue to me that if we aren't discipling people in how to have these conversations in their workplace and with their family members, we're doing them a disservice. So I would think, I don't want to, as a pastor, I don't want to tell people what to think. I don't mind it. If people ask me, I'll say, this is what I think and why. But I'm going to give you the dignity of you wrestling for yourself. And if you come up with a different perspective to me, I respect your dignity in that. I'm happy to have an open conversation, but let's create safety where you're welcome to have a different opinion to me. You're welcome to push back against my views. I embrace that. I welcome that. I'm not threatened by that. If we can create that culture, we are doing something that our society is not doing. I think it's very rare that anywhere in our socio-political platform in society, we are allowing people the dignity of healthy debate.
Yeah, so true. And I think about the scripture that says that you can have a form of religion without the power.
Yeah.
And when we have power, when we're inviting the Holy Spirit to come and bring us, show us the way and bring us power and bring us revelation and direct and guide us in love, then it takes away that form of godliness, that
Correct.
form of religion, that form. And I don't want a dead form.
No.
I want to live by the power of the gospel,
Amen.
by the power of Jesus.
We want that. Amen. All right, well, we'll leave it there.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for being with us. And probably if we've opened a can of worms there, apologies, but we're happy to chat with you and reach out to us on the socials if there's anything there that you'd like to talk through more. Hopefully I haven't scared you off, but I just think we need to be talking about this stuff and finding a way forward if we're going to disciple people in the 21st century. So we'll talk to you on the next episode. Exciting indeed. All right, see you soon, everyone. Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Ministry Matters podcast. Hey, if this podcast has been an encouragement to you or you think it could be to others, we'd be so grateful if you'd share it with your friends on the socials. So before you head back into your day, if you could take a moment to like our Facebook and Instagram pages and share them with your friends, that would be awesome. You can find us by searching @Ministry Matters Podcast, all one word. And one last thing that just helps the podcast algorithm to work for us. We'd really appreciate it if you could take a minute to rate and review our podcast. Be sure to click that follow button wherever you listen to your podcasts so every new episode will be loaded straight to your device. For those of you watching on YouTube, be sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you know when a new episode drops. All the links you need are in the show notes. So thanks so much for being with us today, and we look forward to talking to you in the next episode.